Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Andrew McFarland. I'll be your guest host today for Out Here in the Redwoods. I want to thank Belinda Brooks, our producer, for having me on the show. Today I have Assemblyman Jim Wood. Hello,
hey,
Assemblyman. How are you doing?
Good.
I'm doing good. Next to him is Casey O'Neill from the Emerald Growers Association. And next to him is Mark Lovelace, Supervisor for County of Humboldt. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you
for having us.
Yeah, so we were all in Garberville earlier today, and there was a policy conference on cannabis policy. Any thoughts on how that went today?
It was a great day. We started pretty early. We started about 8:30. Took a tour of a nursery, took a tour of a sustainable farm, had a stakeholders forum, and then that was followed by a public forum. Great information from my perspective. I think it was certainly new information for some of it was new information, some of it was definitely new information for our other participants. I learned a lot.
Great. What did you get out of today, Casey?
It's been tremendously empowering for our community to be part of the process, and so to have Gavin Newsom, to have Assemblyman Wood, to have Senator Huffman all in the room talking about cannabis, talking about how we can build this thing, not necessarily essentially trying to gather the details of what's going on. And so as farmers, as community members, we were able to give comments and provide input to the process, which was very well received, and it was I feel like it was a learning experience for everybody.
Great. Mark, what did you think of today?
I think today just really made it clear that there's been a pent-up demand for 40 years to have this conversation. This community, Southern Humboldt and the Emerald Triangle as a whole, has been wanting for decades to be able to have just a rational, non-hysterical discussion about cannabis as a legitimate policy issue. And after so many years of just absolute silence from the legislature, people refusing to talk about it, people not being able to envision that there's anything to talk about, whether you're for it or against it, whether it's good or bad, this year, finally, we're able to have that rational discussion about it. And I think we're all just really hopeful that it's going to result in finally a good, solid statewide regulatory framework to deal with the impacts and turn this into a legitimate, good, well-regulated industry.
I was in Sacramento a month ago for the Assembly's Agricultural Committee vote on AB 243, your bill, Mr. Wood.
Yep.
And I have a clip that I'd like to show, and maybe we could pull that up right now.
I recognize that the additional guidelines that seek to regulate the actual cultivation of marijuana creates conflicts with other pending legislation. But you have to start somewhere. I like the way I might be doing it wrong better than the way some people are not doing it at all. I commit to you and other stakeholders that I will work together to resolve these differences. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
That's a good line. I might
I stole.
What do you think is causing all this inaction on the part of legislators?
Well, it's a challenging issue for a lot of people to talk about. For whatever reason, people sort of shrink back when you start talking about marijuana. It's been this sort of taboo issue in the legislature for forever, and why I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that, because we would be much better off now if we had been really talking about it. But I will tell you why I think we're having conversations now, and I think it's the initiative that the initiative process is hanging out there. I think people realize that in 2016 there's a pretty darn good chance that this is going to be legalized for recreational use, and that has changed. I think that's created a little bit more urgency within the legislature to talk about this, and so you see more bills now about marijuana than you have in recent years, and the conversations are more serious, but it's still difficult for a lot of people to talk about it.
And I think you hit the nail dead on the head in terms of why we're talking about it now, but the reason we weren't talking about it before all comes back to prohibition. It's this culture of fear, it's this mindset that has been put upon the community that involves the application of a deviant label, in which if we are defined as criminals and our enterprises are defined as criminal activity, we're not able to speak publicly about it. And so even 3-5 years ago, everybody in the community was a gate builder, was a carpenter, was a plumber. Nobody was cannabis farmers. cannabis. And so now that we've begun to have the process of self-identification as farmers, we're also starting to see the conversation develop in ways that we could never have dreamed of, really.
And I've been working on this issue for the last 6 years, being down in Sacramento numerous times, establishing the medical marijuana working group for the California State Association of Counties, and kept encountering this dynamic where talking to someone who really should know something about the issue, and they would literally, when they said the word marijuana, their voice would go down. Like, yeah. And that was really important for me to realize that we're dealing with people who really need to understand this issue but can't even say the word at full volume. Or another person who, in talking about trying to have policies around this, said, our organization will have no policies that contain the word marijuana. And it's really going to be difficult to deal with an issue if you can't actually say the word or put it in print. And it's been a culture change to actually deal with this just as a legitimate policy issue. For too many years, again, people, all they could imagine was that the only question, the only dialogue you can have about it is a values-based one of is it good or bad. And there's no other industry that we regulate that way. Alcohol, tobacco, pornography, strip clubs, whatever, all these things, there's huge values questions out there, but we don't regulate them through prohibition. We say, let's deal with the harm, let's keep it away from minors, and let's figure out how to take a harm reduction approach to this. And we're finally able to have that kind of discussion around cannabis.
Yeah, I think that's why it's such an exciting time right now in the history of cannabis. Just today at Garberville Forum, one man made a very strong statement about not using the word marijuana. He was just adamant that that not be used. And I can see how it could change quickly, because after that, Lieutenant Governor Newsom used cannabis. He just changed right away, and so did everybody else, because we were all listening to each other. But you can't get everybody to listen all the time, and I think if we all just start correcting ourselves and lingo, that'll make a big difference.
There's a lot of power in language. It's the headlines, partially because it's shorter, but the pot growers, such and such and such and such. And so we've been working trying to get this discussion changed to farmers for one, and two, to cannabis instead of either pot or marijuana. And for me, I used to say reefer. I was always, reefer. And same thing, some of my elders in the movement said, listen, the terminology matters, and what we're talking about here is, the scientific name for a medicinal plant that provides tremendous benefit to a lot of people. So, in order to sort of do full honor to it, we've sort of moved into the term, the cannabis, the actual scientific name for it or whatever.
Yeah, I never thought that the word marijuana was derogatory. I never thought about it that way until it was brought up today at the forum that's a derogatory term.
No, me neither.
And the challenge we have in Sacramento is that all the legislation says marijuana. Prop 215 says marijuana. And so, we've got 19 plus years of culture there. Yeah. So I have a hard time getting my colleagues to even talk about the subject. And now I'm going to spend time re-educating them about, okay, I'm going to talk about cannabis, and they're going to, for a while, until they catch on.
Maybe that'll open it all up for everybody to lose
so.
Their inhibitions, and we're changing the subject. Now we're going to talk about cannabis.
Right, and maybe that
not
changes
marijuana
it
anymore.
It's something different.
And for me, for the forum today, one of the things I found most invigorating about it was non-existent was the drugs are bad, okay? It was really this open discussion about how is this going to evolve as an economic reality for our communities, and how are we going to produce this for the future, and in ways that keep the community secure and safe, that we keep it out of the hands of children. That was a point that was stressed a few times. But to me, it seems like as a child of the community, it was very clear that there was a lot of hypocrisy involved in the issue. So I felt no need to listen to the adults as far as what they said was the rules, because I could see they couldn't figure out the rules. And so to me, as I look towards the future of having children, of raising them in this community, I want to be able to tell them, these are the rules.
Wonderful.
Something that was really remarkable about today's forum was contrasting it with something that was put together in 2010, I think. Anna Hamilton put together a forum called What's After Pot. This was right after Proposition 19 had qualified for the ballot, and for the first time, people were thinking about what could this really mean for our community, for our economy, good or bad. And it's going to change. For that part of the community, it's going to change their entire world. And that forum was put together at the Mateel Center, and it was really the first time of doing something that was for folks from the industry to come out and be in a room together talking about this. And at that forum, the ground rules were: don't ask anyone their last name, no photography, no video, no recording devices. The paranoia that still existed at that time, people being afraid to raise their hand and actually say, I'm a grower, I'm a farmer. And whereas at this forum today, there were a couple of times, there was a show of hands of people who were farmers, and like half the hands went up. And no one hesitated. People are, they want to be proud of their industry. They want to be proud of what they do. And I think the difficulty now is developing a regulatory framework that will make all of us proud of that industry.
Nice
make it an industry that we can be proud of.
I was just going to ask Assemblywood about Assembly Bill 243. So, what are you proposing?
Well, 243. Actually, let me back up, because I think it frames the discussion a little bit. Okay. When I was running in last year, very quickly in about January, conversations began to change as I started talking to more and more people about concerns in the district. What do you want to see going forward? It got to a point where wherever I went, if it wasn't the first question, it was the second question. It was, what are your views on marijuana? What are you going to do about marijuana? And so it became very, very clear that was going to be something that was going to be really important to me as I went forward working. So when I was sworn in that very week, I sat down with my new staff, and we started talking about what are we going to work on, because we had some general ideas, but I said the number one issue we're going to be focused on is marijuana, and for me, around the environmental damage that I saw firsthand, and what can we do to change that. So after I think the shock wore off of my staff, it's like, because they knew nothing, I knew next to nothing, and it was like, okay, we kind of all rolled our sleeves up, and we have really immersed ourselves in this to a great extent, to try to learn, try to understand, to try to reach out to stakeholders, to try to come up with some solutions. And is this bill perfect? No, it's not. What I'm trying to do is, there's an existing pilot project that the governor put in place about a year ago. It's called, it centers around a watershed enforcement team. It's trying to get medical marijuana cultivators, cannabis cultivators, to come into compliance around best management practices. Basically, how you use how you get water, how you deal with things like herbicides and pesticides and rodenticides. How do you make sure that your cultivation activity isn't damaging the environment, the roads you put in, the ponds you create, those kinds of things. So it's really all focused around water quality, and it took off because of the drought. The drought gave us the opportunity to really talk about this, and the dewatering of Sproul Creek, the challenges that we're seeing, and even today we heard from Scott Bauer about, here we are in May, and there's creeks out there, streams out there that are going dry, and it's pretty early in the year. So we developed this idea about trying to expand this pilot project. But for me, the importance of the legislation is at this point is my ability to be able to use this to highlight the challenges that we face on the North Coast. And how do I educate my colleagues about the challenges, about the environmental issues, and looking for some solutions. And is it perfect? No, far from it. And it's a work in progress, and we'll continue to work. We got through appropriations this week, a major hurdle, and we'll move on to the floor of the Assembly this week, this coming week, and hopefully move it over to the Senate and continue the discussions. But it's really critical to me that we continue to talk about the issue, and this was my way of highlighting it. The overarching legislation that has been brought forward on this issue has been difficult for years. Tom Amiano brought legislation forward. Lou Correa last year, SB 1262, came forward. Those were pretty comprehensive bills, and they haven't met with a lot of success. And they haven't met with that success because the legislature really has a hard time dealing with this issue. There is somewhat of a head in the sand approach that we've taken, and we can't do that anymore.
No, as a lifelong resident of Humboldt County, I've been listening to local politics and the local sheriff. But that was his largest comment last September at a meeting where he said, we just can't continue to see things go on the way it's going.
And I think the most exciting thing about your bill is the potential pathway to compliance. For 50 years, our community has been beaten with bigger sticks, and it hasn't worked to solve the regulatory issues. We're still dealing with, in fact, worse trauma than we've had in the past. And so for the first time now, there is a carrot instead of just a stick. And so the idea is to be able to encourage farmers to come into compliance. And this is this question of self-identification as a cannabis farmer. 5 years ago, if we had an event for cannabis farmers, nobody would come out because people were too afraid to self-identify. So now that we're starting to see this pathway to compliance, it has really encouraged the conversation in the community. And that's the magic is, like you said, the bill, we're still working on the bill, but the fact that the conversation is occurring in the community is tremendous. And it gives us this, your openness, your willingness to discuss this with our community has been tremendously heartening. For me, a year ago, I sort of was, my life had been this disillusioning process with the democratic process, and I sort of felt like this isn't for me. I've never voted, I've never been part of it, and in the last year, I've engaged, I've become a participant, and I voted, for instance. But the whole, you're being able to have the discussions about the future of our community in a cogent manner has been tremendously invigorating.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot along the way, and continue to learn. I mean, the perception I had of this issue a year ago is completely different. Today adds a whole new dimension to that. To see in the room when somebody said, raise your hand, how many people want to pay taxes? All these arms shot up in the room. It's like, wow, that doesn't usually happen, and not in my world anyway. So it was heartening to see that, and just the openness. I think you're absolutely right. People being willing to come out and talk about it, and I think it's really valuable for everyone. And I hope it's a pathway forward for us.
And these meetings, they start to feel like half revival and half AA meeting, where you see people shake off the culture of fear and stand taller and start to understand themselves as business owners and not as criminals. And that's the thing, is it's this question of things that are thought to be real are real in their consequences. So if we think of ourselves as farmers, of small business owners, then we're going to have a set of responses and a reality that is created that is much different than if we think of ourselves as criminals. And I used to think of myself as a criminal, and now I think of myself as a farmer, and that's a very different thing. And it was never a conscious choice to think of myself as a criminal. It was just what my choice of paycheck meant that I was a criminal because the system had defined it as such. And so to see this translation, especially for somebody who has been convicted of it, this is a very empowering time.
And that's a really important point, because we know that there's a lot of crime still with this industry. We know that there's a lot of environmental damage that's going on, trespass grows, things of this sort. And we really need to look at trespass grows and the black market as what they are. They're an artifact of the reality that there has never been a legal market. Mm-hmm. Prohibition has created this black market and has created advantages for this black market. And if we want to see that go away, what we ultimately need to do is we need to allow for a legal market that can outcompete the black market. Mm-hmm. The people that want to do the right thing, that want to pay taxes, that want to be regulated, that want to be good stewards of the watershed, good members of the community, they need to have the upper hand over folks who don't care what records they leave in their wake.
I think along those lines, I don't think a lot of people understand that until we open this up for the people that want to pay taxes and be permitted, there's no real reason for them to try to help, shut down the illegal grows that people that are really doing the damage.
Mm-hmm. And it's a question of incentivization of good practice. And so under a black market, you see very little differentiation of price. As soon as you see a legitimate market develop, for instance, if you look back at Prohibition with alcohol, you start to see a vast differentiation of price. $2 chuck, $1,000 bottle of wine. So under cannabis prohibition, good practitioners receive approximately the same price as bad practitioners, because there's no, the black market keeps it, so there's no openness and no clear transparency. And so what we've found in wading forward and representing ourselves publicly in the quality of the practice and the standards that we hold for our cannabis, we've been able to raise the bottom line. And so in the community, I've never been able to say to a farmer, this is how you should grow your cannabis. But if I can say, demonstrating the quality of your practice and the quality of the medicine that you produce in a legitimate, transparent way will raise the bottom line because you're able to receive incentivization from the consumer who's willing to pay for that, that changes the whole dynamic. And what we have found is that there is a consumer who's totally willing to pay for the quality of medicine and the extra time and effort and skill. And so we seek to see this connoisseur representation develop that enables us to carve out a niche that is not a commodity-based production, because the standard route we're given is, well, you have to decrease costs, expand, seek ephemeral savings of economies of scale, and that doesn't work for us as craft farmers. We can't scale. We produce a product that's I can't get bigger. I can get better, but I can't grow more. And so we need this a regulatory system that develops to support the small farms. And that's as we look at this picture and how it works, there's an estimated 53,000 heritage cannabis farms in this state.
I think one of the biggest rounds of applause today in Garberville was when they brought up, let's keep supporting the small farmer. And I think we're all in agreement that needs to be the one thing that's included in any future legislation. And I just see our small farmers being the ones who are going to go out and clean up some of the, damages from the past 100 years of logging and what have you, and be the ones to really improve the rivers by stopping a lot of illegal grows.
It's not like the hippies moved out to pristine land. These parcels have been badly mismanaged for decades. We had heavy ranching, we had heavy timber, we had lots of fires, and so my people moved out and homesteaded a parcel that was denigrated. And over the last 30 years, we've been able to breathe life back into it and sort of recreate some of what once was there. And so that's what I think extrapolates very well, is that we've taken these denigrated parcels and through the use of this cash crop have been able to create bounty and quality. And so, like any great, it's the force. There's a light side and a dark side to any large, powerful thing. And with cannabis, we haven't been able to emphasize the light side, and so we're seeing all of these results of the dark side. And so if we're able to build the potential for farmers again to come into the light and be able to stand for their practices, it changes dramatically the result, I think.
And supporting small farmers is also critical for Humboldt County and the Emerald Triangle, because we know that with any industry, we have difficulty competing with folks who have better access to markets, easier environment to work with in terms of the topography and other things of this sort. And we compete in virtually every industry through specialization. And so if we have an industry that is all about large farms, all about a few large licensed growers that are going to be 50, 60 operations in the entire state, they're not going to be here. They're going to be someplace else where it's cheaper and easier to produce, and where they don't have that distance to market that we have. Our ability to compete is going to be through maintaining the heritage that's made Humboldt synonymous with this industry, and turn that from something that sometimes creates a little giggle with that name recognition, and say, no, this is something we want to be proud of that. We want to be proud of that heritage, and we want it to be a product that stands tall along with our wineries that we have up here, along with our microbreweries, along with our grass-fed beef, our dairies, and all of these other products that we have that we're turning out from Humboldt County. We want this to be something that we can proudly compete in that marketplace, not through the lowest cost denominator, but by being a prestige product that differentiates itself among the rest of the products out there.
Did you get a chance to catch the man from France? I'm going to assume he was
Frenchy.
Speaking French.
I was really glad that the only person to use the word terroir was actually French. So
yeah, it was a pretty exciting day.
Well, I think for me the big takeaway from this is that we had a conversation today, and we need to continue to have conversations. I think in Sacramento a lot of times we legislate based on bad actors. So you're punishing, you're setting up a legislative scheme because there are bad actors there. Last year with Senate Bill 1262, there wasn't a lot of conversation. This year it's different. We have, have people who are actually engaging us in the Capitol, actually coming to our offices, sitting down and talking about what they're doing. And so that kind of positive conversation, that kind of laying the issues out on the table is more of what I believe we need to do in general around major issues we face in California. We often just, unfortunately, legislation tends to be somewhat punitive, and it's frustrating to me. We ought to be getting in a room on a lot of these major issues and just sitting down and talking about, here's the problem, here's what people want. Now, how do we all get to that place? And does it even require a law? And in this case, obviously with this subject, yeah, there's going to have to be some regulation. There's going to have to be some things there. But in a perfect world, we would all be able to figure it out. And so I personally prefer a carrot rather than a stick approach, knowing that you always have the stick, but you don't want to ever have to use it.
And as a craft farmer, I can honestly say that without cannabis, I wouldn't grow vegetables for market, and then that nourishment would not be provided to the community. And so, as this regulatory process has got to include in the discussion, diversification, small farm support tools, and all of these different sort of working pieces, and then it has to interface with a larger industry, some sort of a retail outlet, and however that works. And so I really like seeing, one, the discussion about Department of Ag, and two, the discussion about the potential for multiple agencies to regulate it, because very few large industries are regulated by just one agency. And so, for instance, as a farmer, there is no other agency that works for me other than the Department of Ag. They're designed to deal with me, to interface with me. As a farmer, I have a special set of characteristics and needs, and Department of Ag understands that. And so, from my perspective, I'm more than willing to back and support whichever agency is deemed necessary to regulate the retail end of it, so long as a farmer, I interface with the Department of Ag.
Well, where do we go from here? Mark?
We go to the legislature. We try to.
All right, I'm going back to Sacramento. All right.
We support people like Jim and like our Senator Mike McGuire, who have both come in totally fresh and right off the bat have immersed themselves in this issue that other folks have ducked from for years. Jim, I've met Jim when he was first considering running, and I've talked to him a number of times over the years, and he doesn't have the background with this issue that so many of us do that have been in Humboldt County for decades, and he has just plunged forward with confidence and calm, and it's been awesome to see that you've been getting so much accomplished by just moving this dialogue forward and making a discussion that people aren't afraid to take part in.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know any other way. I just dig in. I mean, I need to gather as much information. I need to talk to as many people as I can. And at the end of the day, hopefully we come out of these things with good policy that makes sense for our communities, that makes sense for small farmers, it makes sense for patients, it makes sense for the water board. I mean, it all has to kind of work together. I've never been afraid to tackle a difficult issue. Actually, I relish the challenge. And you know what? I'm the first person to admit I'm going to make mistakes, and I'm going to own up to those mistakes when I make them, and I'm going to regroup, and we'll get back on course, and we'll move forward. But I'm not going to duck the issue.
You know what? I think that's the problem with politicians today. Nobody will take the fall. Nobody wants to say, hey, I'm not perfect. You can't afford a mistake or you're not going to get anywhere. And you've brought up a subject where a lot of people aren't sure where to go with it, and you've put out some very important parts that are going to clean up our rivers here on the North Coast. And I just want to say thank you for all your efforts so far, for sure.
It's truly my pleasure.
Any last thoughts, Mark?
Just as I said before, I've been working on this issue for 6 years, and I've just been so heartened to see that we're finally able to have that rational, non-hysterical discussion about this issue. And I'm really hopeful to see something come through the legislature this year. It's been 19 years since Proposition 215 was passed by the voters, and we don't have any regulatory framework for medical marijuana in California. And with the prospect of legalization in 2016, it's nice that we're both finally playing catch up on medical marijuana and trying to lay the groundwork for what comes next.
Very exciting times. Well, I want to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
And for Out Here in the Redwoods, I'm Andrew McFarland. Thanks for watching.